So glad that you all can be here, and we have more folks joining us throughout the hour. So this is just a note that this webinar will be recorded for folks who either have schedule conflicts or are joining us late, who have technical difficulties, or who want to review this webinar at a later date and share it with their chapters. This is the YNPN Young Nonprofit Professionals Network webinar on developing human capital for chapter success. This is part 2 of our webinar series. In part 1, we learned from Erin Barnhart, a sector expert, and you can check out the content from that webinar on our Leaders site. You can find the YNPN Leaders site in the resources section of ynpn.org. This is part 2, in which we will hear from a panel of leaders from 3 different YNPN chapters with interaction from you, our YNPN leaders from around the country. That panel will share models from their chapters as well as reflect on successes and challenges relating to talent management. So the format for this webinar, all participants who are not speaking will be muted throughout. We'll start by introducing the hosts of the webinar, followed by the presenters and the participants. We'll have presentations from 4 chapter leaders from 3 different chapters across the country. And again, the slides and the video will be available on the YNPN Leader site after the webinar. There's a few ways that you'll be able to interact with the webinar this evening. Before each presentation from a chapter, we'll be offering some polls, or perhaps now and again before some presentations. If you see a poll, click to submit your answer, and I'll review the results. There's another way that you can interact, which is asking a question. We will have time for questions at the end of each chapter presentation, as well as at the end of the webinar. To ask a question, you have 2 different options. One is verbal and one is written. You can either raise your hand, click to raise your hand to be unmuted, or you can type questions in the chat and Ashley will read your questions aloud. So we'd like to introduce the folks who have joined us already on this webinar. If you could go ahead and type your chapter name into the chat, that'll let us introduce you after we introduce the webinar hosts and our presenters. The hosts for tonight's webinar, let me give it over to my colleague Ashley Hartman, who first of all is running all of the technical and logistical aspects of the webinar. So Ashley, I want to thank you for that.
Great, thanks Betty Jean. Hi everyone. Again, my name is Ashley Hartman. I am one of the Launchpad Fellows along with Betty Jean, and my role in the fellowship is to provide field support to our chapters. So mainly what I've been working on is developing something called the Leader site, which I'll talk about later, and also is where all of these webinar slides and videos are available online. And so in addition to the Leader site, I've been working closely with Betty Jean to help develop these webinars, is also working very closely with our wonderful chapter speakers that you'll all get to hear from later. So that's it for me. Thanks, Betty Jean.
Great, and I am Betty Jean. I am another YNPN Launchpad Fellow, and I work as the talent coordinator with our national board, our fellows, our director, and also in collaboration with Ashley, supporting chapters directly, such as with tonight's webinar. We are so excited to have 4 different speakers with us, guest speakers, 4 folks from 3 different YNPN chapters. We have Carrie from YNPN Cleveland, Jessica and Lauren from YNPN San Diego, and Marquita from YNPN Little Rock. So I just want to extend a big thank you to our guest speakers tonight for reflecting on their own successes, challenges, and lessons from their chapter experiences with YNPN. And Ashley's going to do a chapter roll call, so if you haven't yet, please type into the chat which chapter you're joining us from if you have a YNPN chapter.
Great. So far, well, we know we have our presenters from Cleveland, and I guess I'll also wear my Cleveland hat. We have San Diego and Little Rock, as well as Central New Mexico and YNPN Westchester. Oh, and YNPN DC. And we also have a national board member joining us as well. So thank you again, everyone, for coming out, and it's always exciting to see folks from all different areas of the country joining us for the calls.
All right, so I want to turn it over to San Diego. I invite our speakers to introduce themselves, and I just want to remind each of our wonderful panelists to share up to 10 minutes of reflections, and if we don't go over 10 minutes, we'll have some time for questions after each of you.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute Lauren. So Lauren?
Hi, this is actually Lauren and Jessica. We're here together.
Wonderful, so we can hear you fabulous.
So I'm Lauren Gratton. I'm the chair of YNPN San Diego. I've been the chair since January, and before that was interim secretary. And I work in development at UC San Diego Arts and Humanities. And if you're confused by our pictures, Jessica and I are a little bit switched, but you can look us up later, and feel free to connect with either of us afterwards. Jessica?
I'm Jessica. I am the vice chair of the board here in YNPN San Diego, and I've been on the board since last spring, almost a year, just about a year. And I work in communications at the Jewish Community Foundation of San Diego.
I guess we'll tell you a little bit about YNPN San Diego. You'll see on your screen our vision statement, which we came up with at our board retreat last year. But YNPN creates a thriving San Diego by cultivating a highly valued network of emerging leaders dedicated to serving the nonprofit sector. So our goal is to work with this talented team. Whoa, something going on with my screen. Working with a talented team to make a stronger community, just like all of you are. And we do that by having an advisory board, which has a maximum of 15 individuals. There are currently 10, and immediately following this webinar, we're going to be voting on 6 potential new board members. We have 2 internal committees, 4 other committees, and these are all of the people who get work done. You can see some other statistics about our program as well. So we can move forward to the next slide and talk about our board recruitment process. We have 2 periods of board recruitment. We have in the spring this large open invitation application process, and we're, as I mentioned, just wrapping that up. We're going to vote on our new board members. And what we do is we create an application. It's online, and we send it out to all of our different networks. It gets shared on social media, gets shared on our website, gets shared with our established leaders in the community, people who have identified that YNPN is something that they're interested in supporting, and they share it out to their contacts. And we've always been very fortunate to have a competitive application process. This year we had about 18 people apply, and we have the flexibility to bring in up to 9 people, I believe, because 3 people are terming off. But we have 6 candidates who are very attractive. So they apply online, they're reviewed by our board development committee, and then qualified applicants are invited to interview with one board development committee member and another member of the advisory board. From there, everyone provides their feedback, and we invite people to attend a board meeting, which they're doing tonight, and we'll vote on them at the end of the board meeting. In the fall, it's a similar process, but rather than share it out to all of our networks, we look at the specific strengths that we have represented on our board, demographics, industries or sub-industries of the nonprofit sector. So this past fall, we were looking for people with particular strengths in the legal field, and we sent out invitations just to those people that we specifically had in mind as good candidates for the board. That was also very successful. We brought on 2 very strong board members from that. So that's our board recruitment process. Onboarding happens on the next slide, and we have a very strong and very rigorous process of bringing people on board. They get assigned a board buddy, and we also have a 2-hour onboarding and orientation training for what it means to serve on a board, because for many of us this is our first time serving on a board, particularly what it means to serve on an all-volunteer board, and then a more specific introduction to YNPN and what it is that we do. One of the interesting things that we do differently here in San Diego, and which ties into our fall board recruitment, is a StrengthsFinder assessment. Some of you might be familiar with this, but it's one of these personality assessments that you fill out 170 or so questions online, and after you do this, it tells you what your top 5 of 34 strengths are. And these range all over the place. And it's not anything that's good or bad. These just help us to see the makeup of board members and how our team functions and communicates best. So we also were looking in the fall for people who had strategic insight, who were looking at things in a different way than we might, so that we can have a well-rounded board. So we do that with our new board members and come up with a matrix, and we have our annual board retreat shortly thereafter and talk about the ways that we work together and communicate. And that's one of the best things that we do, is our retreat, where we bring together everybody who's on the board and really feel like we're part of a team, remember the mission that we're here to serve, and figure out how we best work together. Whew. So talking about retention, the Chair and Board Development Committee, as Chair, I serve on the Board Development Committee as well, and we work closely on making sure that every board member is feeling engaged, that we're doing everything that we can to give them the resources that they need, the communication, the feedback, the technical support, etc. So that's just a lot of time and energy that goes into that, and the one-on-one outreach. Some of the things that we also offer to keep people on the board, because this is such a, there's so much learning that goes into a new board member that it doesn't really make sense if they just stay on for a year and then term off, is that we provide increased professional development opportunities. We recently had 2 of our board members get to attend the AFP conference here in San Diego, and that was open to them because they are members of YNPN San Diego's board. We also have individual engagement that's kind of going back to what I do, and I reach out to each of our board members to make sure that they are getting what they need. And we also recognize them. We recognize them annually at our, what are those things called? Intercommittee happy hour? Intercommittee happy hour. Thank you, Jessica. Intercommittee happy hour, and at our major public events, and anytime at the retreat, and also anytime that somebody is terming off the board, we recognize them publicly for their leadership and support in front of everybody who's attending from the network. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to talk about how our committees function.
Sure. So because we've had so much success with our board recruitment processes, we do mimic that a little bit with our committee recruitment. We do list our expectations of committee members by having a position description, and we are going to expand that with training through onboarding and a standardized orientation so that everyone understands what YNPN San Diego's vision is, how they're contributing as a committee member. It's certainly about word of mouth, as well as regular emails to the network, especially highlighting specific needs we have for various committees that we need to fill spots on. And we do keep a constantly updated menu of opportunities on our website. I know I only have 1 minute for the 10 minutes, so I just want to run through really quick that to retain committee members, we certainly disseminate meaningful responsibilities down the hierarchy of leadership, or to incentivize people to continue to be involved and maintain a level of career development as they participate as volunteers in YNPN San Diego. And we have a standardized reporting process to make sure that our committee's work is being tabulated and recorded for future reference at the board level and the committee level. And the one thing that we've been talking about is the way we expect our board members to contribute. We have a give or get requirement as a board member, and we've been considering for financial dues, and we've been considering adding that for volunteers as well. So we sort of have that added duty of a board member to increase our volunteer core.
Yeah. Before we go into questions, obviously I think the same challenges that face you all are the challenges that we face in that we're an all-volunteer organization, and so we're volunteer managers of volunteers, and there are only enough hours in the day to do so many things. And it really does fall down to how much time do you have to contribute and to do personal outreach and make people feel individually special and appreciated. So that's the biggest thing. And then communicating with and across our network, we'd like to be more consistent than we are, but those are the biggest challenges, and I think we're doing a good job of working on them. So we're open to questions. I need to look at this little thing that is.
Great. So I just want to remind folks about how they can answer a question. There's a feature where you can raise your hand, and then we will unmute you, and you can share your question verbally. You can also put questions or comments into the chat box, and Ashley will share those aloud so that folks in our recording can hear them. So go ahead and feel free to submit questions. As that is happening, I just really want to thank Lauren and Jessica for their comments, and I think it's just right on with the questions that YNPN chapters have been posing and the issues that they've been looking for resources for. Just to share some history about this webinar series, this is really geared towards YNPN chapters, but covering topics that are relevant to the entire nonprofit sector. Topics like how to match an organization's goals with the personnel or talent needed to make it happen. Topics like the range of staffing models that YNPN chapters and other nonprofits are using. Topics like developing a talent pipeline and retaining talent for the long term and avoiding turnover. So again, thank you so much, Lauren and Jessica, for sharing information from your chapter as well as your reflections on successes and challenges. So I want to turn it over to Ashley, see if she has any questions coming up. If folks are still coming up questions, we also have a special period at the end of the webinar, so you'll be able to share your comments or questions with Lauren and Jessica. Ashley?
Yep. So there currently are no questions in the chat. So Betty Jean, if you want, I can go ahead and send the first poll live.
Excellent.
All right, so I'll go ahead and launch the poll.
Great.
So go ahead and you can just choose your selections here for the poll.
We'll just give folks a moment to do that. The poll is what talent management positions, what leadership positions, what personnel structure does your chapter use? You can check any of the following that apply: a board or leadership team, committees with committee members, volunteers, or members.
So we'll just give it a few more seconds here for anyone else who wants to complete the poll. So I'll go ahead and close that poll now. So again, if you want to vote, go ahead and do so now. I'm about to close it here. Going once, going twice. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results with everyone.
So it looks like all of the folks participating are part of chapters that use a board or leadership team. 83% use a committee structure, and 50% have other type of volunteer leadership roles. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to that poll. And thank you again, our leaders from San Diego, for sharing their lessons. Now I want to turn it over to Carrie from YNPN Cleveland, who's going to share about her chapter. Carrie, we are going to unmute you. You can introduce yourself and get started.
All right, Carrie, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. This is Carrie in Cleveland. Our mission statement is written right up there, not too different from any of yours, I'm sure. We were founded in 2009. I was one of the co-founders, and I'm now serving as the president of the chapter for the next few weeks, and then I am stepping down. I'm also a member of the national board, so I'm still going to be able to connect with all of you, which I'm definitely fortunate for. Our membership structure is pretty loose, so it's hard to say if 1,200 is accurate. Basically, anybody who receives our emails, comes to our events, or connects with us in some other virtual way is considered a member. So it's a pretty large but loose network. Our board is a new invention for us. We were established by a steering committee, and that was basically our work group for almost 2 years, though we had volunteers chip in from time to time. But now we have 7 board members who will be installed very soon, and 3 standing committees, and then a couple of committees that are considered ad hoc or meet more regularly. So since that initial steering committee was founded, separate committees kind of popped up around the work that we were already doing, and eventually we reached a point where we had enough volunteers that it made sense to designate one of those committee people, usually the most active one, as the chair, and then the chair would report to his or her counterparts on the board, and that's how we came up with a board. You can go to the next, the next slide. So now we're moving to a board that has members that had to apply and go through an interview and selection process, and we're actually transitioning to a new board, which is the first time that we've done that in any official way. I would say that the tipping point for us, about 4 years in now, was that we went from finding people to fit the roles that we needed and not the roles to fit people that we already had. So I don't know if that made any sense, but we have roles that are set regardless of who's on board. We don't have roles that fit the people that are already there. So that was kind of the tipping point for us. I don't go into specifics here about the different volunteer roles that we have, how we recruited people, or what their expectations are. I'm happy to answer questions about that. But instead I have 3 lessons here that we've kind of picked up over the years. First, many points of entry, one goal, and by that I mean we have a pretty low bar for getting involved as a volunteer. So not just attending events, this would be someone that helps plan events, for example. Having that low bar allows us to get to know the person, and it allows them to get to know us. And there are a few different ways that we can do that. Give them something small to do, online posting, writing for our website or newsletter, and see if they follow through. We have occasional ad hoc committees for people that are a little more serious, that want to make a real commitment but aren't able to make that commitment on an open-ended basis. So we had a survey working group, for example. We have our mentor program committee, and these are people who aren't on our committees usually. They're just working for us for a short amount of time. So that's another kind of bar for getting involved. We have open meetings, so every other month we have a meeting that's open not only to our committee members, but any member that wants to come in and see what we're up to. And we occasionally make direct requests to people to join a committee. Those frequent flyers who are there at several events and seem like they would be a good fit for getting more involved. Once people have kind of joined on in some capacity, we start ramping them up by giving them what I would call add-on responsibilities. So these are tasks that would be a nice thing to see happen, a nice add-on, in other words, but they're not completely consequential to what we're doing. So having someone take pictures and update our picture website, it's a nice thing to have. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't happen. Having someone stand at the front of the event and just welcome people as they come in, If we're short-staffed and that's not happening, that's fine, but if someone is there, it's a good way to kind of test the waters with them. So once they're at the next level, then we start giving them more substantial things to do. And one thing I learned personally here is that you shouldn't be afraid to let people fail. Sometimes I still kind of have like backup name tags in my bag or things like that that are bound to go wrong sometimes. But in general, if you let people fail at something, they're either going to commit more to what you're doing and take more ownership, or you're going to know once and for all realistically how much you can rely on them. So I would say don't be afraid of having that. In addition to having all those different points of entry and ways for people to connect with us and then ramp them up, we really have one final goal in common for all those people, and that's creating a core group of people who can be relied upon and who consider themselves leaders within the group. And these are the people who are going to find real professional growth in their roles. Not every committee member is going to have new skills to add to their resume as a result of being involved. But this core group, that your ultimate goal of creating them, that's who's really going to benefit from being involved. And that kind of leads into the next lesson, which is share responsibility, share reward, and share ownership. The leadership team can't grow if people feel like they're just doing favors for each other. Like our networking committee is just doing favors for the networking chair. That's not how it works. People need to share responsibility. And then when an event or program succeeds, they can share the reward, and they can share ownership of everything that we do. The entire chapter is theirs, and they own it. One way to kind of bring people in on that is to give them a title. We call all of our committee members ambassadors. It makes it easier for us to talk about them and what they do because we also have general members, but calling them ambassadors just gives an area of seriousness to what we're trying to accomplish. On the other hand, though, you don't want to give too many titles because then they really don't mean anything at all. So finding a nice balance there. You also want to find ways of recognizing and rewarding your most committed volunteers, whether you put their picture up on a website. One thing that's worked well for us is to let them represent the group to someone in the media for an interview or at a community event talking about what the chapter does. And occasionally we'll get, much like San Diego, giving them free attendance to a conference or some other perk that we've been offered. So by investing time in building buy-in from all of your ambassadors or committee members, people are going to start to take ownership of things, and then they're going to invest more in what they're doing. So it's just that continuum of sharing responsibility, sharing ownership, and then in the end sharing reward. And the third lesson, which is the easiest to understand and the hardest to follow, is not to waste time on toxic, and by that I mean toxic people. Navigating conflict in the Cleveland chapter especially seemed to be really difficult, especially when everyone's essentially equal, right? No one's getting a paycheck. Everyone's accountable because they choose to be accountable. There's no penalty if they're not. So you have to determine when you're faced with conflict, is your chapter the place to work through these issues? And if so, you can help people grow personally and professionally. And if the problem is manageable in that way, I would say go for it. In the Cleveland chapter, we had an instance where that was not the case. We determined that the chapter was not the place to work through this particular kind of conflict. So we removed that person from our team. So if someone doesn't demonstrate basic values of respect and team spirit, show them the door. And I mean that no matter how helpful they've been in other respects, you don't want to waste your time on toxic. So as soon as you recognize that that person's having a detrimental effect or diminishing the experience of others in the group, no matter how it affects your chapter programming, I would say get rid of them and do it sooner rather than later. Because in the end, we're doing really important work. We're generally very serious and committed people, but we're trying to have fun and we're trying to build new skills outside of work and get to know people. So make sure you have the right people on board. So if anyone has any questions, again, about those lessons or the specifics of our leadership structure, let me know.
Excellent. We're going to give folks a moment to pose questions if they have any right now. Otherwise, you can ask them at the end of the webinar. And a reminder that you can pose questions as well as comments 2 different ways. There is a feature that you can click and raise your hand. Then Ashley will call on folks and you can share your questions or comments verbally. You can also type them into the chat window. And just a reminder that the chat window is a great place to share feedback, comments, interaction anytime throughout the webinar if you'd like to enhance your experience that way.
Hey Betty Jean, it's Ashley. So we have a couple questions in the queue, but I was thinking why don't we go ahead and do the poll quickly, and so if anyone else wants to type in a question while the poll is live, we can go over those questions then.
Sounds great. So we have another interactive poll. This one is building on topics that have come up throughout the presentation so far, which is the topic of points of entry, as Carrie mentioned, or onboarding processes. So in this poll, you can click any that apply regarding the question, does your chapter use formal onboarding processes? You can click if that applies to board or leadership team members, to committee members, to other volunteers, to members in general, or click if onboarding is informal.
Great. So folks are answering the poll questions. We'll give them a few minutes. And again, feel free to use this time to type any questions into the chat. Actually, we can go ahead. I can leave this slide live and go ahead and ask Carrie some of these questions. So one of the first questions was, how has your flexible leadership structure been beneficial and or challenging? So Carrie, if you'd want to respond.
Sure. Well, we're moving to a less flexible leadership structure, so I guess I'll have to say get back to me on that. The flexible leadership structure was helpful before because as we were growing, we weren't sure what to expect in terms of committee member and board member needs, so it was helpful in that way. And one way it's not helpful is that it's hard to define roles and hold people, even within that small group, accountable. So, you know, in some instances, one person would be the fallback when others weren't holding up their end of the bargain, and that's not really how it's supposed to work. So those are just two examples, one example of an advantage and one of the disadvantage.
Great. Another question was to explain the, oh, I see, let me see if there was a question for San Diego, and I know they're going to have to get off soon, so let me see if they are still on. Lauren and Jessica, are you there? I unmuted you.
Yes, we're here.
Yeah.
Great. So you guys have a question. Can you explain the types of committees that you have on your board?
So we have, what did I say, 6 committees. 2 of them are internal, so our executive committee, which is made up of the officers, the chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer. And the board development committee is also internally to the board. Beyond that, we have 2 programming committees, social and professional development, and those are chaired by board members but have leadership that are not represented on the board. We also have network relations and communications as one committee. They've just merged, and those network relations is really like membership, and communications is pretty straightforward. Our final committee is fundraising. So those are the 6 that we have. We did ask that our committees be chaired by board members so that we have that process built in to have a conduit of information between board and committees. Want to have streamlined communication as much as possible.
I don't hear Ashley. Are you there? Do we have any other questions? It looks like, all right, we have
Sorry,
the poll results up.
Yeah,
No problem.
went ahead.
We asked, great. So we asked participants whether your chapter uses formal onboarding processes. It looks like all of you use formal onboarding processes for board and leadership team members. Most of you, 2/3, for committee members. Doesn't look like folks are using formal onboarding processes for either other volunteer roles or for members. Great. Well, we are going to move ahead. I want to thank folks for all of their interaction in the questions and the polls. As a reminder, you can use the chat box during the rest of the webinar, and we will have more time for questions in a few moments. But now I want to turn it over to Marquita from Little Rock. We are going to unmute Marquita, and thank you. Marquita, you can introduce yourself and share some reflections from your chapter.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting YNPN Little Rock to participate in the webinar. I hope my volume's okay. I kind of dug out my old headphones from my student days and traveling and using Skype.
Great.
Okay, great. So I am actually on the steering committee for YNPN Little Rock, one of the founding steering committee members. In my day job, I actually work for the Department of Human Services as the Policy and Planning Director. So YNPN is certainly a nice change of pace for me from the day job. YNPN Little Rock is about 3 years old. In August 2013, we will be celebrating our 3rd year. Before I kind of go into too much more detail, I realize I did not include our mission statement. Our mission is to ensure that young people interested in careers in the public service and nonprofit sector have opportunities for professional development, networking, and service. And so we essentially accomplish that mission through a very volunteer-driven process. We do not have paid memberships, and I'm not sure that we would even describe the folks who participate as sort of formal members. We host monthly events since our inception, 2.5 years ago. Having our very first networking event to present day. We actually have a networking event on Thursday, and so that's essentially our main focus is to host a variety of either networking, professional development, or service projects, and we kind of rotate those on a kind of quarterly calendar basis. Our actual tagline for YNPN Little Rock is Learn, Network, Serve, because that really encapsulates what we do as an organization. In terms of our current business model, about 1.5 years ago, we were able to identify a fiscal sponsor. One of our steering committee members works for a foundation, and so that's currently our business structure. Now we can move to the next slide, please. So just kind of a quick overview of how our leadership structure has evolved, and it's really evolved very organically over the past 3 years as the needs of the organization and kind of in response to membership needs have changed. First of all, our chapter really grew really quickly at a much faster pace than we anticipated, and so it really kind of confirmed for us that this was a much needed organization in the city of Little Rock or the Central Arkansas area because we swiftly had pretty packed events. And so we started our organization with the steering committee, as I mentioned. We started with a 5-member steering committee. Actually, one of our founding steering committee members had been on the leadership team of YNPN, well, she and her husband, of YNPN Austin. And about 1 year in, she finished grad school, and they relocated to D.C., where she actually had served in a national YNPN capacity. But we went from growing really swiftly and having 5 people on our steering committee, which was working great because it was just enough to balance out the responsibilities to going down to 3 steering committee members with an organization that was growing very swiftly. And so we had a conversation about, are we ready to bring in new people? And we just didn't feel like we were at a place, quite honestly, we were moving so fast that I don't even think we had time to kind of plan for and think through what a recruitment process would look like for bringing in new steering committee members. At the time, we sort of had people who were coming and going, and so we were not really seeing consistent faces to know whether we had, those dedicated folks yet as it related to our chapter. So we continued to function in that steering committee capacity, and then when we approached year 2, we established those more regular volunteers and folks who were coming out to the events over and over. And so we thought it'd be a great time to now establish some committees. And so in year 2, we moved from just steering committee to steering committee and volunteer committees. And we established 3 committees in year 2, a professional development committee, a networking and partnerships committee, and a communications committee. And then we had, about 6 months into that process, we had a very excited volunteer who really wanted to have a committee specifically dedicated to service projects, and we formed a 4th committee, the service committee. And so utilizing that structure, we've really established a great leadership team. After about 3 months or so of hosting the committees, and what we did was we had each steering committee member serve as a liaison to the committee. After about 3 months or so, kind of natural leaders started to sort of pop out on each committee, and we asked those folks would they like to serve as committee chairs. And so since that time, that's essentially been our structure. Very exciting, and as we are approaching wrapping up our 3rd year, we are in the process of actually establishing our first formal board. As I mentioned, our kind of 3-member steering committee, we've been going strong, this entire time, and really for a number of reasons. The organization is growing. A number of things that Cleveland touched on in terms of folks in their commitment to the organization and really feeling the need to give them titles to legitimize their involvement with the organization, and also to share leadership, the importance of really sharing that leadership with those other folks. So we actually, this week, we formed a nominating committee, and this week we met to review board applications, and we will have a formal vote of our committee members and steering committee on next week. Our first board will be a 8-member board, and just really quickly, the positions that we've created are 2 co-chairs, so one who's the lead, the second person then rotates into that position the next year, a treasurer, historian, a programming director, outreach director, and then we have 2 members at large. We conduct a Arkansas Voice Survey, very similar to the National Voice Survey, and so we have someone, one of our members at large, it'll be a task that they'll take on, and then the second member at large will be kind of special projects. So as we continue to explore large fundraisers, major partnerships, that personal serve in that role. So again, we are very excited to be moving into that phase after we have our formal vote. We then have to actually come up with an onboarding process. One of the first tasks for the new board will actually be determining the role of our volunteer committees. There's a number of different structures that other chapters have used, and so we're not sure if we want to go with a formal board and plus just having a general body of volunteers, or if we want to maintain our committee structures. So very quickly, I'll just kind of touch a little bit more in detail on kind of the differentiation between our volunteers, committee members, and general members. Basically, as I mentioned, we don't really have a formal membership process, and that's worked for us really well. We have kind of a revolving door of people who come in and out. We're situated in a city where we have several large universities, either in the city or immediately outside within a 30-minute radius. So we found that the group that we tend to attract the most is graduate students. Who are probably going to be there for 2 to 3 years. So we kind of have folks rotating in and out. So it's very appealing to them that they can just show up for our events, sign up to receive our newsletter, and you're considered a member without having to make sort of a long-term commitment to the organization. We really have functioned with an open leadership environment. Although we've had a steering committee, we invite anyone from volunteers to members to participate in our meetings. We actually have an annual strategic planning meeting, and we like to invite our current leaders or active volunteers. Obviously, our steering committee participates in that annual strategic planning process, but we also invite our emerging leaders. So people who think they might be interested in maybe a leadership position or a board position, we also invite them to participate in that strategic planning process, and we usually have 1 to 2 people who are not already actively involved in the organization who participate. Regarding recruitment and retention, so again, I mentioned that we kind of have this group that kind of rotates in and out because we have so many students involved in our organization. And so, one, we try to get them as soon as they get to the city. We usually host some type of schools back in session, back to school networking event as we have new people who are moving to the Little Rock area from various cities. We also often partner with those educational institutions, so we might host a professional development event on their site. We might bring in a speaker and have the graduate program co-host that speaker. And another thing that we've tried to do, or we hope to do, we'll see how successful it is with the new board, is our board terms are going to be 1 year. So obviously those will be renewable for the folks who would like to stay, but again, so that people know that they can commit to a leadership position, but it's not having to commit for 2 or 3 years, since many of the folks we attract are people who are here for educational purposes. I'll kind of stop there to leave some time for questions.
Excellent. So I want to invite one more time for folks to submit questions one of 2 ways. You can either use the feature to raise your hand, and then Ashley will unmute folks so they can ask their questions verbally. You can also type your questions, or comments for that matter, comments are just as welcome, into the chat box, and then Ashley will read those aloud so that we'll get them on the recording. So any questions? Yep, Ashley, go ahead.
Oh yeah, wonderful. So we do have some questions in the chat. So the first one is, did YNPN Little Rock ever conduct focus groups or do any type of needs assessment survey to determine what the needs are among your members? And after you respond, I would love to unmute Carrie, and you might be able to mention some about the survey that Cleveland did. So Marquita?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, after our first and second year, and we haven't had it this year, we take a break in July, and so right before we take our summer break, and so that's the only month that we don't have an activity, we have an informal kind of networking event where we invite all of our members to attend, and we just have conversations with them, kind of informal, intimate conversations about what their needs are. And I also mentioned that we, in the past year, did the Arkansas Voice Survey, where we did a broad survey of young professionals in Little Rock to determine what the professional development needs are, you know, what attracts them to the sector, what their training, you know, needs are on the job, et cetera. And we hope to continue to be able to make that survey an annual survey. In addition, of course, to like most chapters, we have our post-event evaluation forum that folks actually attend. One of the challenges for us, I think, has been because we have not had anyone who was sort of our data manager, but we will now. That's one of the designated responsibilities of one of the new board positions. But is sort of how do you use all of the information and analyze it, and how do you build that back into your programming?
Great. So, Carrie, I'm going to unmute you. Would you like to add anything about Cleveland survey that they did a few years ago?
Sure. Well, we've done 3 surveys in 4 years. 2 of them, the first and then the most recent, were about the middle one was more about issues that people had in their careers. Some of the answers and findings from that second survey translated into our programming, but that wasn't really our intention. And then we also have post-event surveys occasionally too. And one of our new board members is going to be tasked with with the responsibility of getting out a survey every year and figuring out how YNPN Cleveland can remain responsive to what people are saying about their career paths.
Great, thanks, Carrie. So we'll go ahead, actually, it's the end of our presentation. So Betty Jean, if you kind of want to wrap up these last couple slides.
Great. So first, we want to point you towards some further resources. Many of these were suggested by Erin Barnhart, our speaker from the last webinar. Those resources, Energize Inc., TechSoup.org, Coyote Communications, and BoardSource. If there's any other resources about these topics that you recommend, feel free to type them into the chat so that we can share them between participants. And if Ashley sees any new resources, those will be read aloud. We really want to draw people's attention to the YNPN National Leaders Conference coming up soon. You'll see links on this slide to registration, travel reimbursement for chapters, and requests for proposals for programming both for day 1 and day 2 and 3. Those days feature different programming towards slightly different audiences, and you'll see that described on the links. So we would love for any participants or folks checking out this webinar later to attend the conference and to submit programming. Next, the Leaders site. There are so many resources there, including the slides from part 1 of this webinar series, and you'll also find the slides and video from part 2 this webinar soon. So you can share those with other folks. In addition to webinars, we have our chapter support blog. We have a resource library, a calendar, and coming soon we will have an interactive forum. If you have ideas, questions, or comments about the Leaders site or about other ways that your chapter would like support, you can email Ashley at chaptersupport@ynpn.org. We want to invite you to stay in touch with our presenters who are generously sharing not only their time and reflections tonight, but their contact information just to encourage some further YNPN interchange. Again, I really want to thank Carrie, Lauren, Jessica, and Marquita for all of their excellent reflections tonight. You can also stay in touch with Ashley and myself, Betty Jean, 2 of your YNPN national, also your field coordinator and talent coordinator, respectively. Feel free to get in touch with us about there's any way that we can support your chapters and your members with these topics. And finally, I want to thank you so much for attending. We will have programming continuing this series at our National Leaders Conference May 17th to 19th. So I hope you all can join us again. We're going to wrap up the webinar for now. I want to thank everyone for attending, for participating in polls and questions and otherwise interacting. Have a wonderful night, and thank you for being part of YNPN. Take care.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.